Stop killing your blueberries, grow bigger, healthier berries in containers. If you've ever babied a blueberry plant for months only to end up with a handful of sad, shriveled berries, or worse, no berries at all, I want you to know something right now. It's not you, it's not bad luck. And it's definitely not because you don't have a green thumb. Trust me, I've killed my fair share of blueberry plants before I figured out what was actually going on. So today, we're fixing that. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly why your blueberries might be struggling in containers, and more importantly, how to turn things around so you get bigger, sweeter, healthier berries this season. We're covering everything: the mistakes that are quietly killing your plants, the fixes that actually work, and the little tricks that take your berries from meh to magnificent. So settle in, grab something to drink, and let's get your blueberries back on track. Let's be honest for a second. Growing blueberries in containers sounds simple until you actually try it. You buy the plant, you stick it in a pot, you water it every once in a while, and then nothing. Or worse, the leaves start turning brown, the branches look weak, and eventually the whole thing just gives up on you. If that sounds familiar, you are absolutely not alone. I've been in your shoes, staring at a wilted little bush, wondering what on earth I did wrong. And here's the thing nobody tells you when you first start out. Blueberries aren't hard to grow. They're just misunderstood. They have very specific needs, and if you don't meet those needs, they will let you know, usually by dying slowly and dramatically. But once you understand what they actually want, growing them becomes almost effortless. So today, we're not just going to talk about what kills blueberries. We're going to talk about how to bring them back to life and keep them thriving for years to come. And hey, if you're new around here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We post gardening tips like this all the time, and I promise you don't want to miss what's coming next. Alright, let's jump into it. First, let's talk about the single biggest killer of container blueberries, and it's something almost nobody thinks about until it's too late. The container itself. I cannot stress this enough. The pot you choose can make or break your entire blueberry journey. So many people go out, buy a cute little pot from the garden center, plant their blueberry bush in it, and expect magic to happen. But here's the harsh truth. That cute little pot is basically a death sentence for your plant. Blueberries have shallow but wide-spreading root systems, and they need serious room to establish themselves. If you cram them into a small container, the roots become tangled and cramped almost immediately. This is called being root-bound, and it's one of the most common reasons blueberry plants slowly decline no matter how much you water or fertilize them. Once those roots start circling around themselves instead of spreading outward, the plant simply cannot absorb enough water and nutrients to support healthy growth, let alone produce fruit. So what size should you actually be using? I recommend nothing smaller than 15 to 20 gallons for a mature blueberry bush. Yes, that sounds huge, but think of it this way. You're not just planting a berry bush, you're building it a permanent home. The bigger the container, the more room the roots have to spread, the more soil volume there is to hold moisture evenly, and the less likely you are to deal with the plant drying out on a hot afternoon. And here's a tip that changed the game for me. Try using fabric grow bags instead of hard plastic or ceramic pots. Grow bags are breathable, which means the roots get more oxygen and are far less likely to become root-bound in the first place. They also help prevent that soggy, waterlogged soil that suffocates roots over time. Plus, they're lightweight and easy to move around if you need to chase the sun or protect your plant from a nasty cold snap. If a 20-gallon container feels like too much right now, that's okay, start smaller, but understand you'll need to size up as your plant matures. Just don't make the mistake I made early on, cramming a beautiful, healthy blueberry bush into a container that's basically a shoebox. Give it room to grow, and it will reward you tenfold. Now let's talk about soil, because this is where things get really interesting, and honestly where most people go wrong without even realizing it. Blueberries are one of the few plants that absolutely demand acidic soil to thrive. We're talking a pH somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5. If your soil isn't in that range, your blueberry plant physically cannot absorb the nutrients it needs, no matter how much fertilizer you throw at it. It's like trying to eat a meal with your mouth taped shut. The nutrients are right there, but the plant simply can't access them. I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I planted a beautiful blueberry bush in regular all-purpose potting soil, thinking soil is soil, right? Wrong. Within a few weeks, the leaves started yellowing between the veins, growth slowed to a crawl, and I genuinely thought I had a defective plant. Turns out the plant was starving in soil that was simply too alkaline for it to function properly. Once I understood what was happening, the fix was surprisingly simple. I switched to a mix specifically designed for acid-loving plants, something you can usually find labeled for azaleas, camellias, or rhododendrons, since they share similar pH preferences with blueberries. I also added peat moss or cocoa coir into the mix, which naturally lowers the pH and helps retain moisture without waterlogging the roots. And if your soil still isn't acidic enough, a soil acidifier or a bit of elemental sulfur worked into the top layer can make a huge difference over time. Here's my honest advice: don't guess. Grab an inexpensive soil pH tester from your local garden center or online. It takes 2 minutes to test, and it will save you months of confusion and frustration. Once your soil is in that sweet spot, you'll actually see the difference. Greener leaves, sturdier stems, and eventually plumper berries. Getting this one factor right is honestly half the battle when it comes to growing thriving container blueberries. Alright, let's move on to watering, because this is another area where blueberries are surprisingly particular. Too little water and the plant dries out and stresses badly. Too much water and the roots essentially drown, leading to root rot that can kill the plant just as fast, sometimes even faster. The key word here is consistency. Blueberries want soil that stays evenly moist, almost like a wrung-out sponge, never bone dry, never sopping wet. In general, aim for about 1 to 2 inches of water per week, though this will vary depending on your climate, container size, and how hot your summers get. Containers dry out much faster than garden beds since they have limited soil volume and are exposed to air on all sides, so don't assume that because you watered a couple days ago, your plant is fine. Check the top inch or two of soil regularly. If it feels dry, it's time to water. If it's still damp, hold off. Personally, I've found that a simple drip irrigation system on a timer takes all the guesswork out of this. It delivers slow, steady moisture directly to the root zone without the risk of overwatering or letting things dry out while you're busy with life. If that's not an option for you, a watering can or a gentle hose attachment works perfectly fine too. Just be consistent about it. One thing I want to mention because it trips so many people up: mulching. A layer of mulch on top of your soil, whether that's pine bark, pine needles, or wood chips, does wonders for retaining moisture and keeping those roots cool during hot weather. It also happens to help maintain that acidic soil environment blueberries love so much. Adding a couple inches of mulch around the base of your plant while keeping it away from directly touching the stem can dramatically reduce how often you need to water and protect the roots from temperature swings. Trust me, this one small step makes a massive difference in how healthy and resilient your plant becomes. Now let's talk sunlight, because blueberries are total sun worshippers. These plants need at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight every single day to produce a good harvest. If you've got your container tucked away in a shady corner of your patio because it looked nice there, I hate to break it to you, but that's probably why your berries are small, sparse, or non-existent. Sunlight is what fuels photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is what gives your plant the energy to produce fruit. Without enough of it, your blueberry bush is basically running on empty, doing just enough to survive, but not nearly enough to actually thrive and fruit heavily. One of the beautiful things about growing in containers is that you have the flexibility to move your plant around to chase the best light throughout the day or throughout the seasons. If you notice your current spot doesn't get quite enough sun, don't be afraid to relocate the container to a sunnier area of your yard, balcony, or patio. That said, if you live somewhere with brutal, scorching summer heat, some afternoon shade can actually be beneficial, protecting the plant from stress and leaf scorch during the hottest part of the day. It's all about balance. Plenty of morning and midday sun, with a little relief if your afternoons get intense. Pay attention to how your plant responds. If the leaves start looking pale or scorched at the edges, that's a sign it might need a bit more protection. If growth seems weak and leggy, it's probably begging for more direct light. Blueberries will tell you what they need if you're willing to pay attention. Okay, now let's get into the mistakes, the real ones, the ones that quietly kill container blueberries without people even realizing what's happening until it's too late. I've made most of these myself, so let's go through them together so you can avoid the same headaches. Mistake number 1, planting the wrong variety for your climate. This one catches so many people off guard. Not all blueberry varieties are created equal, and not every variety will thrive in every region. Blueberries need a certain number of chill hours during winter, meaning hours spent below about 45 degrees Fahrenheit, in order to properly break dormancy and produce fruit the following season. If you plant a high chill variety in a warm climate that never gets cold enough, or a low chill variety in a freezing climate it can't handle, you're setting yourself up for disappointment no matter how well you care for the plant otherwise. Northern highbush varieties generally need somewhere around 800 to 1,000 chill hours and do best in colder regions. Southern highbush varieties are bred for warmer climates and only need a few hundred chill hours, making them ideal if you live somewhere with mild winters. Rabbit eye varieties are another fantastic option for warmer, humid regions and tend to be more heat tolerant overall. Before you buy your next blueberry plant, take a moment to look up your USDA hardiness zone and choose a variety that's actually suited to where you live. This single decision can be the difference between a thriving, fruit-loaded bush and one that just sits there sulking every year. Mistake number 2, ignoring cross-pollination. Here's something that surprises a lot of new growers. Many blueberry varieties, especially highbush types, will produce more fruit and larger fruit when you plant 2 different varieties near each other for cross-pollination. If you only have one lonely blueberry bush, it might still produce some berries, but you'll likely get a much smaller harvest than if you had a second compatible variety nearby. If you have the space, consider adding a second container with a different but compatible blueberry variety. Not only will this boost your yield, but it can also extend your harvest season since different varieties often ripen at slightly different times. Mistake number 3, over-fertilizing. I know it feels like more fertilizer equals more growth, but with blueberries, that logic backfires fast. These plants are actually fairly light feeders, and overdoing it, especially with fertilizers high in nitrogen, can burn the roots, cause excessive leafy growth at the expense of fruit production, or even throw off the soil's delicate pH balance. Stick to a fertilizer specifically formulated for acid-loving plants, applied lightly in early spring as new growth begins, and again lightly after the first flush of fruiting if needed. A little compost worked into the top layer of soil each spring also does wonders without the risk of overdoing it. Less really is more here. Mistake number 4, letting the roots dry out or drown. And I know we already talked about watering, but it deserves repeating because it's genuinely the #1 killer of container blueberries. Inconsistent watering stresses the plant, weakens its immune system, and makes it far more susceptible to disease and pest problems. Set a consistent watering routine and stick to it, checking soil moisture regularly, especially during hot summer stretches when containers can dry out surprisingly fast. Mistake number 5, neglecting to prune. This one's sneaky because it doesn't seem urgent, but pruning is actually essential for long-term plant health and productivity. Without regular pruning, blueberry bushes can become overcrowded, with weak, spindly branches that produce smaller, fewer berries year after year. Every late winter, while the plant is still dormant, remove any dead, damaged, or crossing branches. For mature bushes, also remove some of the oldest, thickest canes to encourage fresh, productive new growth. This keeps the plant open, allows better air circulation, which helps prevent fungal issues, and directs the plant's energy toward producing bigger, better berries rather than maintaining a tangle of unproductive old wood. Alright, now let's talk about something a little more exciting, harvesting your berries at exactly the right time. Here's a secret a lot of people don't know. Just because a blueberry looks blue doesn't necessarily mean it's ready to pick. Blueberries actually continue ripening and sweetening for several days after they first turn fully blue. If you pick too early, you'll end up with berries that look perfect but taste tart and underwhelming. The trick is to wait until the berry has that deep, dusty blue color all over, including around the stem end, and gently roll it between your fingers. If it comes off the branch with just the slightest tug, it's ready. If you have to yank it off, give it another day or 2. Patience here genuinely pays off in flavor, and once you start harvesting, don't be surprised if you're out there every couple of days, because blueberries don't all ripen at once. They ripen gradually over several weeks, which honestly is a blessing because it means a longer harvest window and fresh berries spread out over time rather than one overwhelming dump all at once. Now, let's address the birds because if you've grown blueberries before, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. Birds absolutely adore blueberries, sometimes even more than we do, and they have an uncanny ability to swoop in and strip a bush bare seemingly overnight. If you've ever gone out to check on your berries only to find the bush completely picked clean, you're not imagining things and you're definitely not alone. The most effective solution is bird netting draped completely over the plant, secured tightly at the base so birds can't sneak underneath. Just make sure the netting is taut and doesn't have gaps because birds are surprisingly clever about finding their way in through the smallest openings. Some people also have success with reflective tape or old CDs hung near the plant since the flashing light can startle birds away. And here's a trick that's worked surprisingly well for me, setting up a separate bird feeder elsewhere in the yard, away from your blueberries. It sounds almost too simple, but giving birds an easier, more accessible food source nearby can genuinely reduce how much attention they pay to your berries. Whatever method you choose, just make sure you have some kind of protection in place before the berries start ripening, because once the birds discover your container garden, they will absolutely be back for more. Before we move on, I also want to touch on something that catches a lot of container growers off guard down the road, and that's repotting. Blueberries are slow growers compared to a lot of other fruiting plants, but they will eventually outgrow whatever container you start them in, especially if you began with something smaller while the plant was young. Every year or two, it's worth checking the base of your container. If you see roots poking out of the drainage holes, or if the plant seems to be drying out unusually fast even with regular watering, those are both signs it's time to size up. When you do repot, try to do it in early spring before new growth really kicks in, or in late fall once the plant has gone dormant, since moving it during active summer growth can shock the roots and set your plant back. Gently loosen the root ball when you take it out of the old container, especially if you notice any roots starting to circle around the edges, and tease them apart a bit before placing the plant into its new, larger home. This encourages the roots to grow outward into the fresh soil instead of continuing to spiral in on themselves. And here's a nice bonus, repotting every couple of years also gives you a chance to refresh the soil entirely, which matters more than people realize. Over time, potting soil breaks down, compacts, and loses some of that acidity blueberries depend on. Even if you're not moving to a bigger pot, refreshing at least the top layer of soil annually helps maintain that ideal growing environment year after year. Let's also talk briefly about pests and diseases, because even in containers, blueberries aren't completely immune to problems. The good news is that container growing actually helps reduce a lot of common issues since you have so much more control over the growing environment compared to an in-ground garden. That said, keep an eye out for aphids, which tend to cluster on new growth and can be knocked off with a strong spray of water or treated with insecticidal soap if they become a persistent problem. Also watch for signs of fungal issues like leaf spot or powdery mildew, which are usually caused by poor air circulation or overly wet foliage. This is exactly why pruning for airflow and watering at the base rather than overhead really matters. If you do notice discolored or spotted leaves, remove them promptly and make sure your plant isn't sitting in overly damp, stagnant conditions. Healthy, well-cared-for blueberry plants are naturally more resistant to pests and disease, so honestly, most of what we've already covered, proper soil, consistent watering, good sunlight, and regular pruning will do the heavy lifting in keeping your plants problem-free in the first place. One more thing before we wrap up, and this is something people often overlook: winter care for container blueberries. Unlike blueberries planted directly in the ground, container plants have their roots much more exposed to cold temperatures since there's less surrounding soil mass to insulate them. If you live somewhere with harsh winters, consider moving your containers to a more sheltered spot, like against a wall or into an unheated garage, once temperatures start dropping significantly. Wrapping the container with burlap or bubble wrap can also add an extra layer of insulation for the roots. Just remember, blueberries do need a certain amount of winter chill to properly fruit the following season, so you're not trying to keep them warm and cozy like a houseplant. You're simply trying to prevent the roots from freezing solid and suffering damage. Finding that balance protects your investment and sets your plant up for a strong, healthy start come spring. So there you have it, everything you need to stop killing your blueberries and start growing bigger, healthier berries right in your containers this season. It really does come down to a handful of key factors: choosing the right container size, getting that soil pH properly acidic, watering consistently without overdoing it, giving your plant plenty of direct sunlight, pruning regularly, and protecting your harvest from hungry birds. None of this is complicated once you understand what your blueberry plant actually needs, and honestly, once you dial in these basics, container blueberries become one of the most rewarding things you can grow. There's really nothing quite like walking out to your patio or balcony and picking fresh, sun-warmed blueberries straight off the bush. If this video helped you out, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any future gardening tips and tricks. Drop a comment below and let me know, are you starting your blueberry journey this year, or are you rescuing a struggling plant that's been giving you trouble? I'd love to hear your story and help however I can. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy growing.